Buying Power, A History of Consumer Activism in America. Buying power comes from a term that was used by one of the groups I look at called the League of Women Shoppers. Their slogan was, "Use your buying power for justice." And the idea behind that slogan was that Americans consume a lot of goods, and that consumption is a powerful way of making a moral statement. And in my book, I try to extend that idea from the League of Women Shoppers, who existed in the 1930s and 40s throughout all of American history, to argue that Americans have consistently used their buying power for political and moral and ethical purposes. Contemporary commentators often describe consumption as an apolitical act, as an act that sort of separates us from other people, and that is often considered as private and individual. But I think history shows that Americans have had another side in how they viewed consumption, which is viewing consumption as connecting us with other people, connecting us to the people who made the goods that we buy, connecting us to other people who maybe buy or don't buy through boycotting similar goods. And in my book, I try to show that Americans, I think, have been deeply concerned about the moral impact of their shopping. The tradition of consumer activism is as old as the American nation, indeed a little bit older. I trace it back to the run-up to the American Revolution in the 1760s, when the non-importation movement began, as it was called. And this was a movement led by colonists, particularly to get merchants not to import goods from Great Britain. And one of the ways in which Americans first defined themselves as a nation rather than as British colonial subjects was in that process of boycotting British goods and beginning to try to buy goods that were domestically produced. This was a really radically new kind of political movement and was one of the things that led to the formation of the American nation. Probably the most important and famous event in this process was the Boston Tea Party, where British tea was dumped overboard by American colonists who were trying to get other colonists not to buy British goods. This was seen as a way of weakening British colonial power, but also as establishing a new kind of national identity. One of the things that I find is that a lot of American historians know about the American Revolution and the non-importation movement, but oftentimes when they think about consumer activism, they next turn to things like the Montgomery bus boycott in the 1950s. And so it's a very discontinuous history. And what I tried to show is that Americans have turned to consumer politics consistently from the American Revolution through the entire 19th century, through the 20th century, to the present. And one of the movements that I look at is the movement by abolitionists